This is the full training for the administration of MAP for Plano ISD. This training should be provided to all staff administering MAP with facilitation by the Campus MAP Testing Coordinator. What is our purpose for using MAP, or Measures of Academic Progress, in Plano? MAP measures student performance compared to national norms for achievement and national norms for growth. MAP results are highly predictive of performance on STAR. Because MAP is not grade level specific, it allows us to make sure all students are learning and growing year after year, not just students who are on or below grade level. The MAP RIT score identifies the spot on the learning continuum where a student is ready for instruction. What comes before that RIT range on the continuum is what the student already knows. We use this one assessment in our district to fulfill many purposes. This allows us to minimize testing. We use MAP to fulfill the TEA requirement of a universal screener. It is part of gifted identification. It's part of Math Rocks identification. And it's part of intervention identification. MAP is considered in special education evaluations. It gives us a growth measure. It helps to identify TEKs for improvement in all tiers. And we also can use it for goal setting with students. The Assessment Research and Program Evaluation website can be accessed through the Plano ISD Staff Only page. You'll know you're on the Staff Only website if the school icon and the selections are at the top are in red. Blue is the public page. Or you can go to the tiny URL, Plano Assessment. Once you get here, you can click on MAP in the center column. Click once to open the accordion. Click again to open the page. Students will be rostered in MAP periodically throughout the year. If you get a new student during the year, typically they will appear in the system to test after 3 days. It is not best practice to test a student on the first day they're enrolled in the district. If your student is not in the system and you need to test them, contact the assessment department. Campuses should not be adding any students to the NWEA system. There is one website for the teacher to use to set up testing sessions, monitor sessions, including pausing tests, and get reports. This is called the MARC system, Measurement and Reporting Center. You have a shortcut to this on your web desk. Note the bar graph icon. In this presentation, we will show this bar graph icon when the screenshot is from the teacher or proctor screen. There is another website for students to log on to take their test. There's a shortcut on the Windows Start menu or on the taskbar in Chromebooks. Notice the student icon. In this presentation, we will show the student icon when showing screenshots of what students will see on their computer. During testing, you as the proctor will need a computer to set up and monitor testing, and the students will need a computer to test. For students to access the Student Testing Center, if you're using Windows, desktops, or laptops, access the shortcut through the Start menu. If you're using Chromebooks, access the shortcut through the icon in the taskbar. Students do not log on to the Chromebooks, they just go directly to the taskbar. Both of these methods will take the student to the lockdown browser. This means the student will not be able to go into other websites while testing. If you're new to the district, look for an email from NWEA that will have your username and password. The email will come from MAP Autoresponder. Use this to log on to the MARC system. Note that your username is your full PISD email, including the @pisd.edu. Your password is not your network password, but one assigned to you from NWEA or created by you. If your password is not working to log into the MARC screen, first make sure you're using your full PISD email, and then click the Forgot Password option at the bottom of the page. If you do not have an NWEA account, contact Karen Simons in the Assessment, Research, and Program Evaluation Department. There are 4 steps to testing. First, setting up the testing session, logging on students to test, monitoring testing, and finally ending the session. NWEA provides several ways to complete each of these tasks. We've looked at all the options, and what is presented here is the easiest way to do each of these tasks. We've chosen these procedures specifically to help eliminate possible problems. Step 1 is setting up a test session. The proctor or teacher, whoever is testing the students, on the day of testing, will log in to teach.mapnwa.org. Yes, it is possible to set up a testing session before the day of testing. However, because the auto-generated password needed to test changes each day, we recommend setting up the test session the morning of testing. It takes less than 2 minutes to set up a testing session. The teacher or proctor will set up a testing session the morning of the test. Think of a testing session as a room and a time period in which they will test. This can be either a class period or a test day, depending on the circumstances. To set up a testing session, in the top of your screen, click Map Growth. Under Testing, look for the option that says Manage Test Sessions. From here you have two options to setting up a testing session. Test My Class is for classroom teachers who have students rostered to them in Pinnacle and Teams. Find Students to Test is for specialists who will test kids who are not rostered to them, and classroom teachers who need to find students who are not finished testing on day 2 and later of the window. Let's first look at the Test My Class option. This is for classroom teachers. You have students rostered to you in Pinnacle or in Teams, so we know who those students are that you'll be testing. And then click Test My Class. The students that are rostered to you now appear in your testing session at the bottom of the page. When the list at the bottom of the page is complete, click Test Now. From here, you will want to select all of your students. You can do that by clicking Select Status and choosing Awaiting Students. This selects all of the students on the page. You'll now have the option to assign the test to the students. Teachers should assign the correct test to all students when taking MAP. This avoids having to delete a test later when a student has taken the wrong test. So now that all your students have been selected, you will click on Assign Test and choose the correct test from the drop-down menu. You will only assign one test at a time to each student. It is not best practice to administer multiple tests in one day. All Plano ISD teachers are expected to access the Plano District Testing Calendar and be familiar with which students should take which test and when this should be done. The District Testing Calendar shows specific test names to administer to each grade level, as well as when to administer these assessments. The District Testing Calendar is available on our Assessment, Research, and Program Evaluation website under Calendars. You have now assigned a test to each student in your class. Now let's look at the Find Students to Test option. If you are a specialist, ESL teacher, or special ed teacher, you do not necessarily have students rostered to you in Teams or Pinnacle. Instead, you'll want to find students who are rostered to other teachers in other classrooms. On the morning of testing, and click on Find Students to Test. Here you can search by grade and teacher to find students, or you can search by name or ID. You'll fill in the appropriate information and click Search. This is a list of all students who meet your search criteria. Use the checkboxes next to student names to select only those students that you'll need to test. Then click Add Students. These students now appear in your testing session at the bottom of the page. If you need to add more students, search again and add more students. When the list at the bottom of the page is complete, you can click Test Now. If the Test Now button is not clickable, that is because the students are active in another open testing session, or you have another test session open yourself. That testing session must be closed or the student removed from the testing session in order for you to test the student. As a proctor, you can only have one open active testing session at a time. Students can only be in one open active testing session at a time. Once you click Test Now, you'll have the option to assign the test to the students just as we did before. Select all students who need to take the same test, either by clicking the checkbox next to their names or by going to Select Status and choosing a waiting student. Then click on Assign Test. From the drop-down menu, select the test the students need to take, and again you'll only assign one test at a time, and you'll refer to the district testing calendar for dates and specific test names. You have now assigned the test to all of your students. Before you start testing, if you have students who have been provided accommodations while testing, you can document that in the system. Some accommodations are also embedded in the MAP system. Allowable accommodations can be found on the Assessment, Research, and Program Evaluation website for MAP. The accommodations are listed under Administration and MAP Allowable Supports. These students have all been pre-assigned the correct assessment. Some of these students may additionally need accommodations. You can assign or document those accommodations that the student receives during testing from this menu. Select the student by clicking the checkbox next to their name. Then select Assign Accommodations. There are some accommodations here that are part of the NWA system and that the test can provide to the student. These are embedded features. Selecting those features will allow the student to access the features on the screen during the test. Other accommodations listed are non-embedded features. These are features that are not a part of the test environment, but providing these accommodations can be documented on this page. For example, a bilingual dictionary. Please note that not all these accommodations are allowable for all students. You must refer to the Allowable Accommodations document on the PISD staff webpage for the accommodations that you can provide to students in our district. If you're providing oral administration on a MAP reading test for a student according to the PISD Allowable Accommodations document, make sure to allow the oral administration of questions and answer choices only, not the oral administration of passages. Once you've selected the accommodations on this menu, click Assign at the bottom of the page. You'll notice that next to this student, we now have a yes in the accommodations column. That shows that we've added students to our testing session, we've assigned them a test, and now we can see that we've documented their accommodations. Now we are ready to test. So step 2 of the process is logging on students to test. Here are a few helpful hints. If you're testing a new student, you won't be able to see them in the system to test until about the 3rd day that they're enrolled in the district. It is not best practice to test a student on their first day. If the student does not appear in your system after 3 days, contact the assessment department and have that student added to the system. As with all online activities, we recommend staggering the login of kids rather than having them all click the button to begin the test at the same time. NWEA provides student directions for the test that the proctor can read aloud. These directions let teachers know what kinds of support they can offer students while testing. The directions can be found on our website for MAP under MAP Testing Student Directions. The process of setting up a testing session takes anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes at the very longest. Therefore, it is not difficult to set up the testing session the morning of the test. This is the test student window on the teacher or proctor screen. Note the bar graph icon indicating that this is the proctor screen. The testing session name and password are at the top of the page. This is what students will need to log on to the test. These are auto-generated by NWEA, and they are unique to each testing session, not each student. This is what you'll need to write on the board for students to see. This is what the students will see on his or her computer. I've included the student icon at the top to indicate that these are screens that students will see when they log in. The student will navigate to the website using the shortcuts installed on their computer. On a Windows device, they'll go to the magnifying glass and type NWEA and search for the lockdown browser. On Chromebooks, Before they log in to the Chromebook, they will go to the taskbar, select Apps, and select Map. Students will log in using the testing session name and password that you have given them. Once the student has entered the test session name and password, they will click Join. If the username or password is not working to log on students to test, keep in mind that the passwords change each day. That's why we recommend setting up the testing session the morning of the test. Your username may also change if you're reusing a testing session. That's why we don't necessarily recommend reusing a testing session. So check your proctor screen at the top to make sure your username and password is the same one that you gave your students. When the student gets to the sign-in screen, they'll start typing his or her first name, and it will appear in the drop-down menu. The student will select his name, and then the test that you've already assigned will appear. Then the student will click Next. If the student's name is not in the drop-down menu, check to make sure the student's name is on your proctor screen for this session. If they're not, you can add them. Check the status of that student in the proctor or mark screen. It should say Awaiting Student. If it does not, click Select Action and choose either Test Again or Resume. Click the Refresh Status button at the top of your screen. The student and teacher will then verify whether the information is correct and then click Yes or No. This is your last opportunity to make sure that the right student is sitting at the right test. The students will have to wait until you've confirmed their test before they can begin. This message will appear on every student's screen until you confirm the student for testing. Your next step is to confirm your students from your proctor screen. Notice that as the students log on and get to that page that says Wait to be confirmed, their status changes from a waiting student to be confirmed. In the top, you can click Confirm Now to confirm these students. Now, you may have to click this button a few times to capture all students who are waiting to be confirmed. It may take a minute once the student gets logged in until their status says To be confirmed. You can also click the Refresh button at the top of the page. If the student screen says To be confirmed, but your mark screen still says Awaiting Student, click that Refresh button at the top of the screen. It will update and you'll be able to confirm the student for testing. If you see this message when you try to confirm a student for testing, it is because they've already begun testing on the subject area test you've assigned. In the drop-down menu, you have the option to resume the test or start a new test. If you start a new test, the test they have already begun will be terminated, which means it is deleted and not recoverable. This should only happen if two different teachers are testing the same subject area. The only time I can see this happening is if an ELA teacher tests reading, then a specialist pulls that student later to finish testing. If you see this message, just remember that you want the students to resume their testing. You do not want them to start a new test. If you have students who start testing but do not finish within 28 days, that test is automatically terminated and the student will have to start over. This is what will appear on the student computer once the teacher has confirmed students on their proctor computer. The student can now click Start Test and begin testing. Step 3 of the process is monitoring testing. As the student begins testing, you can see his progress on your screen. You can see what question each student is on. If a student needs to take a break from testing longer than 30 minutes, click the checkbox next to the student's name and then choose Select Action and choose Suspended. Then have the student log off the test. This pauses the test for breaks longer than 30 minutes. When the student returns, click the checkbox next to the student's name, click Select Action, and choose Test Again. This does not start the test over. It begins testing where the student left off. If the student is completing testing on another day, he will just log in and you can confirm him and his test will begin as usual. You also see here an option to pause the test. Pausing is for breaks shorter than 30 minutes. If the student is gone longer than 30 minutes, the test automatically moves to suspend. It is really not necessary to pause a test for short breaks. If the student needs to go to the restroom or take a break, they can just leave the test and go. If a test is paused, to come back to testing, you would select Resume. There are other ways to pause a test, but we recommend this as the easiest way. In the drop-down, you also have the option to terminate a test. Terminating the test deletes the test event and all student responses from the system. Only select this option if you want the student to completely restart testing. We cannot undo this action. MAP has tools to help make sure students are engaged in testing. There are many ways students may exhibit disengagement from testing. One way is by rapidly guessing. NWEA monitors this by comparing how long it takes a student to answer each question to the average amount of time students take to answer the same question. Note that rapid guessing and disengagement from the test is not the same as a student carefully reading the question, not knowing the answer, taking a guess, and moving on. There is a difference between being engaged in the task and guessing and not engaged in the task and guessing. When a student rapidly guesses through multiple items, two actions are triggered. The difficulty of each item will lock at the level the student is performing at, rather than becoming less and less difficult. When the student re-engages and begins applying effortful behavior, the test items will already be at the student's appropriate level. The test will automatically be paused. The student will get an alert that reminds them to slow down. If this screen appears on the student's computer, the proctor can intervene with the student and resume testing, terminate testing, or choose to resume testing on another day. The student will not be able to move on until the proctor takes some action. This is what the alert looks like on the teacher or proctor screen, an orange triangle next to the student's name. This gives you the chance to talk to the student, give them a break, or let them stop for the day, depending on their needs. If you resume the test and the student begins rapidly guessing again, it will auto-pause again. The test could auto-pause up to 3 times. If a student has had a test auto-pause 3 times, that means the test event has met the threshold for 33% disengagement on the test. NWEA recommends that if a student has been disengaged for 1/3 of the test, that the test should be terminated. In most cases, if you have a student who's been auto-paused 3 times, you'll want to terminate the test event and test him again on another day. However, there may be some unique situations with particular students for whom it may be appropriate just to continue testing and get a score. This is a teacher or proctor decision. If while testing the test exits and the student says he can't rejoin the session, you have some options to resolve this. Check your proctor or mark screen to make sure the student's status says awaiting student. If it is not, then choose Test Again or Resume from the Action menu. You can also click the refresh button at the top of the page. You may also want to try selecting Do Not Confirm from the drop-down menu. Then have the student log off and log back in. If a student arrives late for testing, this should not be a problem if the student's already in the testing session. If you've left all of the students in the testing session, then a late arriving student can simply log on and begin. If the student is not in your testing session, click Add More Students and follow the steps to add the student to your session. The final step in our process is ending the test session. If your campus is testing students during class periods, for example, you're testing your first period kids in reading and someone else is testing their fourth period kids in math, then we recommend ending the testing session after each class period. If your campus or grade tests in this way, then you would want to set up a testing session for first period, end it at the end of first period, and set up a new testing session for the beginning of second period. If you pull a group of students into a computer lab, or students rotate through computers in your room throughout the day to test, we recommend setting up a new test session each morning, keeping it open all day until the end of the day, or until you're done testing for that day. So let's talk about how to end our testing session. When a student finishes testing, their score will appear on the student screen, which you can print if you would like. When you are done testing for the day in a particular class period in secondary, if you have students who are still testing, click on Select Students, select Action, and choose Suspend. Then you can end the testing session. Take note of students who have not begun testing or who need to finish testing on another day. You have the option to change the name of your test session once you click End Test Session, and then you can save the session. Now, this option is here to allow you to reuse a testing session. However, we do not recommend reusing testing sessions, so our training will not use this option. From here, you can simply click Save and Exit. Note that the student's test and their answers are not stored in the testing session. The test event, the answers, and scores are stored with NWEA. So deleting the session will not delete any student responses or completed test scores. If you accidentally delete a test session, that is not a problem. On the second day of testing, it is possible to reuse a testing session that you saved from the day before. Again, we don't recommend this, so we'll not be discussing that option. NWEA designed the system to allow you to search for students who began testing but did not finish on the first day, or who have not yet begun testing. So for example, you may have tested your class yesterday, but some students will need to finish, and you may be continuing the test on day 2 of the window by resuming testing in your classroom. You may have a specialist or other teacher who comes to pull students who are not done testing from different classrooms and then completing that testing in a lab setting. Whoever is proctoring the test can search for students to test and create a new testing session for day 2 of the window. Assuming not all students will complete testing in one day, you can search for students in a similar way to how you created your testing session on day 1. Click Manage Test Sessions and click Find Students to Test. Then click the Test History Search tab at the top of the page. From here, you will search for students who have not begun testing or have begun but not completed testing. Choose the school, the grade, the instructor, or class at the top of the page. Then select Test Name. Under Testing Status, select Not Yet Tested and Suspended Tests. Then click Search. Select the students from the list that you will need to test. If you're a specialist or special ed teacher, you may not be testing all of these students by yourself. Just select the students you're going to test and create your session. Whoever is testing the other students will search for them and select them to put in a different session. If you're a classroom teacher continuing to test in your own room, go ahead and select all the students even if some are absent or you will not get to them today. It does not hurt to have all these students in a testing session. Then click on Add Students. Click on Test Now. You may have to scroll down a bit to see the button. From here, you're going to follow the same procedure from earlier to assign tests and document accommodations. In the scenario where most students need to take Math, but one student needs to take Reading, assign Math to every student, then select the one student who needs to take Reading, as I've done here in this example, and then click on Assign Test. And from the drop-down menu, select the test that the student needs to take. Remember, you can only select one test at a time, and it's best practice only to give one map test per day. Once the student tests have been assigned and accommodations are documented, you are ready to test. Note that although some of these students have begun testing and some have not started at all, it says Awaiting Student for all students. That does not mean the student needs to begin again. When the student logs back in, the test will pick up from where they left off. Because you search for students who have not yet begun or who have suspended tests, you will have captured the students without a completed test. This is why we don't recommend reusing a testing session. The process of searching for suspended or not yet begun tests to create a testing session on day 2 is how MAP was designed to function. Notice that the testing session name and password have changed. This changes for each session that you create. This is what the students will need to log on to test. From here, follow the same procedures as before to log on students, confirm them, and begin testing. You'll repeat this process each day until testing is complete. Now you will see preliminary results on the student screen when they have completed testing. Results will appear the next day in NWEA, and results will appear in EdGence on the following day. There are reports available in the NWEA system. Some of these reports do not fit with Plano ISD's philosophy of data analysis, and therefore we will not use these reports. You will still use the probability ranges, ability performance charts, and class by writ in EdGence to meet your data needs. And it is still the district expectation that you use the EdGence student profile with probability ranges to talk to parents about MAP. That is because this student profile from EdGence is what appears on Parent Portal for parents to access at home. All the training materials that you will need for MAP can be found on our Plano ISD staff website. You can access this website through the Plano ISD staff-only webpage or through our tiny URL, Plano Assessment. This is where you will find the Plano ISD district testing calendars. These district testing calendars tell you when to test, which students to test, and which version of test to select. It is the expectation that all campuses closely follow the district testing calendar. In the center of the page, you'll find MAP resources. Click once to open the accordion, and then click again to access the page. Under Interpretation, you'll find information about how to read, understand, and then use the MAP data for instructional purposes. Under Parent Communication, you'll see a parent brochure that you can make available to parents in either English or Spanish, as well as an example parent conference with a Plano ISD parent showing how to explain MAP to parents. In the Technical Support section, you'll find the MAP Troubleshooting Guide. Almost every question that you would encounter while administering MAP can be answered by referring to the Troubleshooting Guide. It is handy to have that with you when you are testing students, especially for the first time. In the same section under Technical Support, there is a section about when to request a score deletion. In the event that you think a student needs to be retested in MAP, you'll want to refer to this information for criteria to consider when deciding whether or not to retest a student and the process to go through in order to retest a student. Should you have any questions about MAP, your first go-to is on your campus. Every campus has a MAP testing coordinator that can support you in the administration and interpretation of the data. In addition, the Assessment, Research, and Program Evaluation Department in Plano ISD is here to help you as well.